Hello. Hi, everyone. Can I invite everyone to take their seats, please? Please take your seats. We are about to start. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sheila Coronel. I am the academic dean here at the Columbia Journalism School. Welcome, our alumni and students. Tonight, we have the second of two Hearst digital media lectures for the year. Every year, with the support of the Hearst Foundation, the school appoints the Hearst digital media professional in residence to participate in activities such as classes and programs, then deliver 2 digital media lectures. It provides a unique opportunity for our students to interact with the leading professional in the field. The Journalism School has had the opportunity to invite significant leaders in digital media to take up this residency. Past honorees have included Melissa Bell of Vox Media, Meredith Artley of CNN Digital, Mario Garcia of Garcia Media, Amanda Cox of the New York Times, Krishna Bharat, creator of Google News and a member of our Board of Visitors, venture capitalist Ken Lehrer, Stephen Johnson, Brian Storm, Adrian Halavati. It's a long list of other luminaries in the field of digital journalism. This year, we are very happy to have the media editor of BuzzFeed News, Craig Silverman, who's standing here right behind me. There is probably no better time to have a forum on investigating the internet as now. Long before you heard of Cambridge Analytica or the phrase fake news or Twitter bots, Craig was already there doing the kinds of investigations that tries to hold platforms and the people doing sordid things in those platforms accountable for what they do. Craig Silverman is an award-winning journalist and author and the leading expert in online misinformation, fake news, and content verification. At BuzzFeed, he leads a global beat, this is now a beat, covering platforms on online misinformation and fake news. Craig previously was the founding editor of BuzzFeed Canada and was also the founder of Emergent.info, a rumor tracking project that was developed as part of a fellowship with our very own Tao Center for Digital Journalism here at the Journalism School. From 2004 to 2015, he wrote Regret the Error, a blog about media accuracy and corrections, which became part of the Poynter Institute for Media Studies and was the basis for an award-winning book of press criticism. He is the former managing editor of PBS Media Shift and has been a columnist for the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, and Columbia Journalism Review. Please welcome Craig Silverman, who comes from Toronto. Thank you, Craig, for coming.
Thank you, Sheila. All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Alumni Weekend to all of you who are coming back. So I was here in the fall, and I gave a talk about the battle for attention and this new media environment that we're in, and how the emergence of platforms and all of these other new elements have really made it very easy to manipulate this media environment. And so I thought I'd come back now in the spring that I laid out how maybe terrible things are and say, but you know what, there's some things we can actually do about it. And so I want to sort of talk about 4 stories that I was lucky to work on that we did at BuzzFeed and go through them. And I think the thing that they all have in common is that when you first looked at it, when you looked at whether it's a website or a collection of information, it looked like one thing, but when you actually dug in and when you dug deeper, there was something really else going on. And I encounter this all the time with the work that I do. And I think that you don't need to be some weirdo specializing in misinformation to apply these kinds of skills. In fact, I think it's needed across beats, across everything in journalism now, because so much touches the internet. And so that's sort of the idea behind today's talk. But I wanted to start by playing a special message for you from Barack Obama.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dip. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of up dystopia. Thank you. And stay woke, bitches.
So I'm probably the only Hearst visiting professional who will have a video that says "Stay woke, bitches" in it here at Alumni Weekend, I think. So apologies for that if anyone didn't appreciate it. I did play the censored version with the beeps in it. This is a video that we put up a little bit, or a little bit earlier in the week, and it was created using new technology it's called deep fakes, where you can basically take, Jordan Peele speaking and a video of Obama speaking, and the artificial intelligence runs and runs and runs. We ran it for almost 60 hours under the supervision of a visual effects professional to put the two together. And people are starting to use this technology now. And the point of that video, along with the message that's in it, but in particular for journalists, there's a fundamental thing that we sort of have to come to grips with this environment, which is that a lot of the things that we see is actually not what it is at all. And as I said with the stories that I want to just talk through today, this was the case with a lot of them. It looked like one thing, and it was really designed to look that way, but when you scratch past the surface, it wasn't. And I think for journalists, this is obviously a great reporting opportunity, but it's something that we have to keep in mind, in particular in the digital environment, because so much of what we see looks very quantifiable. And this was actually a really great point made in a recent piece in Columbia Journalism Review, also by a former Tao fellow. So Nick talked about, you can see a number of retweets on a post. It actually looks like a very credible, quantifiable thing. You see, there's a hashtag trending, but people know how to manipulate these things. You can purchase fake retweets. You can, buy bots to help push a hashtag into trending. And so Nick's message is that you have to discount this stuff. You can't just instantly take it at face value. And this is where we're at. We have this weird kind of combination in the digital environment whereby things look very quantifiable and very clear. And hey, there's data, there's a report, but it's incredibly easy to fake all of those things as well. And so I think for journalists, it's really important to keep that in mind when we go about doing our work. Otherwise, we get taken in by this stuff. And many times it's actually targeted at us so that we write about it and we amplify it even more. So here's the first story. End of last year and into early this year, a bunch of emails went out to people in senior positions at NGOs. And they received these emails. They were from people saying they worked for like investment firms or other kinds of companies. They were interested in starting up philanthropic efforts, and they wanted to meet these executives in person. And so they sent the email. People at the NGOs, they got the email, said, okay, this looks interesting. They looked, there were websites for all of these companies. Here's 3 sample ones from different companies. They also would look on LinkedIn, and these companies, they had pages on LinkedIn, and there were employees that you could find on LinkedIn. Then you looked at the employees' profile, where they were, the schools they had gone to, and all these things. And so in a lot of cases, these NGOs, they took these meetings. And in at least one case, somebody from an NGO had their flight paid for them to go and meet these folks as well. And so everything seemed very normal, and they went and they did the meetings, and people showed up and they met them at the meetings, and everything seemed very normal. And then a few months or a few weeks go by, depending on when they had the meeting, and all of a sudden, some media reports start to appear. And so what had happened is that these meetings had been recorded surreptitiously, and then the tapes were put together, and in some cases kind of edited or framed misleadingly, and then linked to media. So on one hand here we have a story from Jerusalem Post. This is a story in Hungarian media, and basically what was going on was an effort that NGOs that were funded by George Soros were being targeted, and there were like 7 or 8 different companies that targeted different NGOs to get meetings with them. And then they recorded them and then leaked it to media to make it seem like George Soros was, trying to control the media and trying to influence the Hungarian election. And so you actually had the now re-elected Prime Minister of Hungary talking about Soros Leaks and citing these tapes. And so what happened, obviously, is this is kind of an elaborate sting operation. And so we learned about these meetings had happened. We learned that the people at the NGOs felt completely burned. And we managed to go back and we looked at the websites and we looked at the LinkedIn profiles and all of these different elements to try and figure out who was behind this. It was very clear that the goal was to help the re-elected prime minister in Hungary, who ran a very anti-Soros campaign. They had posters and everything there. It was a big part of it. And this was more ammunition to sort of say that Soros is working behind the scenes to covertly influence our politics. So one of the things that we did was, we looked at when you buy a domain name, you can pay for privacy to hide your information, or sometimes you'll actually not, and we get a name. In this case, in most of the cases of the domain names, they had actually paid for privacy. But one of the nice things is sometimes when you pay for privacy, it actually gives you a unique email address that is linked to that email. So this is for the domain name smartinatech.com. And when we looked, there were only about 15 other domain names that had used that exact anonymized email address to register that site. And so we ended up seeing that all of these other sites that were registered with that exact secret email address were related to a Russian billionaire named Suleiman Kerimov. And the weird thing about these sites was that when you looked at them, they basically existed on the internet, and there were like more than a dozen of them, to just praise him. And they all, a man of the people, an unusual success story, talking about all the different things he's done. Now, he was arrested in France and charged with, I think it was either money laundering or fraud, back at the end of last year. And so we saw these websites had gone up early this year. They had been registered all around the same time. Some of the domains redirected into each other. And so, of course, now we have a lead to sort of figure out, is there a connection to a Russian oligarch here? And what we also found in addition to the websites was that they had actually created a whole bunch of Twitter accounts to tweet out links to the websites to promote these websites. So, and the interesting thing that we also saw was a lot of the accounts, the Twitter accounts, were kind of targeting Americans who had big Twitter profiles and were often very anti-Trump accounts. And they would just kind of reply and be like, oh, but you know what? There's some good Russians out there too, like Suleiman Kerimov, and they would link to the site. And it was a very clumsy campaign. And this is a really common tactic that people use when they've got reputational problems on the internet. They create a bunch of websites that link to each other. They try to create authority, and sometimes they'll pay to have reputable websites linked to them to raise up that search authority. And the goal here, we thought, was to kind of rehabilitate Suleiman Kerimov's reputation and also to do a little test on social media to see if they could get some traction. Not a very good effort, a clumsy effort. But in the end, it was kind of this interesting little side note to the story that we did. And we reached out to his official foundation, and they denied having anything to do with these websites. And we ended up publishing this story about all of these NGO meetings. And by the way, you saw the pictures of those people. We're still trying to identify them. If anybody recognized them, please come up and tell me after. Because we haven't yet been able to figure out exactly who was running this operation, and we're still working on it. But even without knowing everything that went on, by connecting some dots, we were able to have this strange link to a Russian oligarch and also be able to clearly show that all of these websites had actually been run on the same technological platforms and all followed the same formats of creating certain kinds of profiles on certain kinds of websites. So just by connecting those dots, we were able to get a story right before the Hungarian election. So here's another one. And this example, I think, is kind of important because you have a lot of people kind of pretending to transparency. And this is a chart from Twitter. They publish a transparency report twice a year where you can look at a variety of data. And this is the data of countries requesting that Twitter either remove accounts or remove specific content. So these are government requests for censorship on Twitter, which is a pretty important thing to look at, given what an important speech platform it is. And so Twitter publishes this transparency report, where twice a year they sort of show the data of like the latest requests. And along the bottom here, you see this nice chart of showing actually how the requests have really increased over time. And it seems to kind of tell you a story of where the most requests are and what's been happening. But there's one thing that Twitter doesn't tell you, which is the actual accounts and the actual tweets that are being withheld, as they call it. So if Germany says this account is violating our hate speech laws here, and Twitter looks at it and determines that, yes, according to German law, it's violating German hate speech, but it doesn't violate any hate speech laws in the United States, Twitter will make it so that anyone who's using it from Germany can't see that account, but people from the rest of the world can. And Twitter never released a list for this. And they don't tell you which accounts are withheld, and they don't tell you which tweets are withheld. So we decided to do that for them. We figured out that there's a way in the Twitter API to actually see a classification that is made to accounts that are withheld. And so using a few different methods, we actually built a list of about 1,700 withheld accounts around the world. And what we found, to be really brief about it, is Nazis. We found a lot of Nazis. And so what was interesting is that they would be withheld in Germany and they would be withheld in France because there are very specific anti-Nazi hate speech laws in those countries, but they would be freely available for people all around the rest of the world. And there was actually a point last year where people on Twitter started to realize this, and there was a movement for Americans to change their location setting to Germany so they wouldn't have to see any more Nazis. And this was something that started to actually spread on Twitter a little bit. So these are the kind of accounts that we found, and we looked at them and we classified them and tried to figure out what they all had in common. And then we also were able to see how they distributed around the world. And it did kind of align with the overall data of what Twitter was saying, that there's a lot withheld in Germany, there's a lot withheld in France. But what stood out to us was Turkey, because Turkey maybe isn't initially the country that you would expect there to be tons of this, but of course there has been a progressing crackdown on free expression and on the free press in Turkey going back several years now. And so when we dove into Turkey a little bit, the thing that was interesting here was we could actually use Twitter data as almost a proxy, the Twitter withholding data as a proxy for seeing as the Erdogan government changed and became more and more autocratic. And you see this data helps tell the story where sometimes it's actually hard to quantify what that looks like. Certain media have been shut down or taken over by people sympathetic with him. But this actually gives you a sense of them making requests and demanding of Twitter, and Twitter acquiescing to a lot of these demands, seeing that spike that happened. And so this is where we can quantify something that, even though Twitter is giving us something literally labeled a transparency report, we don't actually know what that looks like in practice. We don't actually know what the content looks like. And this data is available, but it's hidden in an API. And so you have to know to go and get it. And in doing so, I think you reveal something that Twitter didn't reveal. And we do actually have a follow-up story coming on this soon. And I won't reveal too much of it except to say that there's even more about the transparency report that we found is not very transparent. So with these big platforms, even when they're giving us data, we have to be wary of it, is one of the big conclusions there. And so this is the story that we published earlier this year. All right, so another case here. One of the things that has really progressed a lot and is very big now in the new media environment on Facebook and other places is what people are calling hyperpartisan media. We've had partisan media for a very long time. You can think of like The Nation on the left, The Weekly Standard on the right, and the roots of the American newspaper is very partisan as well. So it's not like partisan media is a new or strange or terrible thing. But there is kind of a new life for it on Facebook where they're extremely partisan. People refer to it as hyperpartisan. It's not just I'm advocating for conservative causes and beliefs. It's that everyone who is a liberal is terrible, and vice versa. It does come on both sides because they're whipping up the passions that are there, and Facebook is a very effective platform for doing that. And we wanted to actually figure out what does this universe look like. And so we did the boring work of identifying 667 websites, classifying them as conservative or liberal. We found 452 Facebook pages that were connected to them. And then we downloaded about 4 million posts going back to early 2015. And so we tried to perform a bunch of different analysis. And I just want to highlight two pieces of it. So one thing that we did was we wanted to figure out, is this actually growing? Are there actually more of these, or are we just imagining it? And so the thing that we used to do that was we looked at when the domain names for these websites were first registered. That doesn't mean that they exactly launched on those days, but it means that at that point, someone has a conception for doing something with this particular domain name. So again, we thought it was a good proxy for when they roughly were kind of getting active and launching. And our hypothesis was that it felt like a heck of a lot of these launched in 2015 and 2016 in the run-up to the election, and the data pretty much backs that up. You can see this huge spike in conservative ones, and you can also see a relative spike for liberal ones. The conservative partisan media universe has been bigger for some time. They have felt excluded from mainstream media, and so through talk radio into cable news, I think they've been much better at building up their own kind of media universe. And so it's not surprising we see a lot more sites on the right. But what was interesting is that when we looked at the engagement data on Facebook, from the point where Trump was elected, the liberal sites started doing a lot better. And so when you look in the Obama era, it was a great time for conservative hyperpartisan media on Facebook because they have an enemy, right? And then when Trump gets elected, it's great business for the liberal sites. And one of the things you can see here how that played out. Once we get sort of post-election, you can see the engagement for the top liberal posts are consistently above the conservative ones, and that wasn't really happening. They really caught up and then overtook them after Trump was elected. And because there was this great new opportunity on the liberal side, what started happening even in late 2016 is that people who are running conservative sites started launching liberal sites. So we identified, using things like domain name ownership, shared analytics codes, and other things, that we found at least 4 people or companies that actually were playing both sides and own liberal sites and own conservative sites. And this is an example of the story that we did about this. These are two, we have Liberal Society, we have Conservative 101, 2 different articles published they were published on the exact same day with different writers. They have the exact same photo, and they write the same false story, but with a different slant. And it turned out that the people running these sites it's the same group of guys in California, and they owned a group of conservative ones and a group of liberal ones. I actually know people who started as committed conservative publishers who now only publish liberal sites because they say that it's not worth running conservative ones anymore on Facebook. It's changed so much. Last note on this story, those 4 billion posts and that engagement data we downloaded, Facebook has recently turned off access to a bunch of different things, and we looked to go and update our story, and now we can't. Facebook has turned off the access in its API to that data. So as much as we need to be finding out what's going on and using this data to do it, it's actually getting harder and harder. The motivation, you could argue, is good because they're trying to be better stewards of people's data. That's what they say. But the end result of that is journalists are now being cut off from the small amount of data we had access to before. So it's something that I'm increasingly concerned about. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't say they were the same writer. It's the same owner. Yeah, the bylines are different. And a lot of these sites, people do use pseudonyms, but I don't know whether they were written by the same person. It's possible they were written by 2 different people working for 2 different sites owned by the same person. But if you go and you find these articles, you will find that actually it was only about 30 words that were different between the 2 of them. They embedded the same tweets and had the same content, just flipped it different ways. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, you should keep investigating. I'm with you. We can talk about it after. These guys also, by the way, they run clickbait religious sites. So they're sort of playing both sides on that, and then they're also in the religious business as well. And that's common. You see people getting into lots of different niches. So last one here. This is like a legitimate website, the International Business Times. This happens to be their Indian edition. Looks like a normal news website. They do have people writing for it. It's actually owned by the company that now owns Newsweek as well. And so this is a company that we've been looking into a little bit. And so when I look at a website, one of the things that I want to understand is where do they get their traffic from? And who goes to this website? And are they buying traffic or is it coming organically? And so this is the analytics you get for this site from a service called SimilarWeb. And a lot of this is publicly available data. You don't necessarily have to have a subscription. So we see here, we see a site that seems to have a consistent audience. But when I look at this, just like somebody reads an SEC filing or some other kind of document, we need to, as journalists, be able to read these kinds of reports as well. And so there's a few things that stand out to me. The first thing, if we look at traffic share there, almost 60% of it is coming from desktop. That's weird because, as you know, you've got the phone in your pocket. Most of the audience for news sites these days comes from mobile. So that's a bit weird. That's a bit of an outlier. And then when we look over on the far side there, the average visit duration is over 5 minutes. Do you typically spend more than 5 minutes on sites? You may think you do. I will promise you, you mostly don't. We're all flipping between sites. So that's an insanely high time on site. And then we also see that apparently people who come to the site read more than 3.5 pages in each session. Also really unusual, even for sites that people are very loyal at, like, those are numbers that people aspire to in the news business. So that makes me a little bit suspicious. And then here's two other things that are a bit weird. So this is an International Business Times India, and only 34% of their audience is coming from India. So apparently people in the United States and Canada and the United Kingdom are very interested in this site. That seems a little bit weird. And then the thing that really kind of opens up a door for the thing that's most worth investigating here is the channels overview, which is, again, where does the traffic come from? On the far side, it says 20% of the traffic is coming from display ads. So that means they're buying the traffic. They're putting ads on other sites, and they're getting people to come from those ads. By the way, also, when you see direct as a source, you should be very suspicious of that, because that's like the bucket that analytics software puts everything that they can't figure out where it came from into. And a lot of sites like to claim that, oh, that means we have a very loyal audience and people type in our domain name. And no, that is not what it means. Like, some people may be doing that, but that is just like this giant mysterious black box that the analytics software throws everything into. So be always suspicious of that. All right, so the ads piece. Here's the point that I think everyone should understand a little bit better, is that a lot of people talk about bots online. Bots will click on ads, bots will be sent to a website, and that's absolutely a problem. But an even bigger problem over the last year is people buying traffic and manipulating it or disguising it to seem like really good traffic. So here's what's happening, and here's what a lot of sites have been doing. So a user goes to a porn site or to an illegal streaming site to watch some anime or something, and if you click anywhere in the page, all of a sudden a new browser window will instantly pop up. And you might see it. It might pop up in front of your face and load another website, or it might actually pop under the browser that the window you're looking at. And once that happens, you may not even notice that it's there. And as you watch your cartoon or what have you, that window is there, and it's loading tons and tons of different websites in cycles. And every time it loads a new website, that registers as traffic. So people are buying traffic from porn and illegal streaming sites, and then it is routed through browser windows that people may not even be aware is there. And this is a really common way of getting cheap traffic. That's very cheap traffic to buy online, and porn sites and legal streaming sites get a lot of traffic. So it's like there to be sold in huge quantities. Here's what it looks like. So this is kissanime.ru, and when I clicked on a video, it opened up the International Business Times India for me. I didn't ask for that website. They just decided to open that for me. This is sold as what's called zero-click traffic, because you didn't click on that site, but you still got traffic to it, right? And I work at BuzzFeed, so I made a GIF. I hope you're very proud of me for that. So this is what was going on, but the thing that's really interesting about it is, before it loaded International Business Times India, it for a split second, it loaded another site called newsplatter.com. And so it's going from the ad site to newsplatter.com onto International Business Times India. And what that does is basically launders the traffic. So rather than clearly coming from an ad as a pop-under or a pop-up, it actually looks like it's a referral from another news site, and advertisers will pay more for that. So this is what's happening a lot. And just to quickly show, newsplatter.com through the same time period suddenly goes from 0 to lots of traffic, and we can see that it basically gets all of its traffic either from display ads or from the black box of direct. Last thing to note is that all of the traffic from newsplatter.com goes to IB Times India. So it's a website that exists to funnel traffic to International Business Times India. So we wrote a story about this. This is ad fraud, by the way. Like, Google will not allow you to place its ads on your site if you are doing this kind of surreptitious redirects. And subsequently, we also found out that they were running code on their website so that if that browser window popped up underneath and you couldn't see it, they actually would manipulate the statistics so that it looked like you were fully viewing the ads, which means they get more money. So this was something that was being run by like a relatively reputable publisher. And now they've signed up to a bunch of auditing programs and this kind of thing. But you look at that site, everything looks normal. You look at the stats and you don't dig deeper, everything looks really normal. And they're not the only ones doing it. We found a network of 21 online arcade sites that were taking that page traffic and laundering it through and then sending it to a subdomain on MySpace. And we found 25 different sites that looked like they were esports sites that were all funneling that same kind of traffic to a bigger esports site. So it looked like they had all these other esports sites sending them traffic, but they owned all of these other sites. They bought traffic and routed it through to them. And this is obviously a big problem in media because there's ad money going to people doing this that could be going to other publishers. And roughly about $16 billion was stolen last year in the digital advertising ecosystem, which is money that could have gone to fund other more reputable things, right? And just the last note, if you look at the traffic patterns for these sites, because they're all just exchanging the same traffic, they look identical. So these are traffic rankings for 20 different sites that all look exactly the same because they've all got the same traffic and they're just spreading it around to each other. And this stuff is actually not that complicated to figure out. You can go look at SimilarWeb, you can see where the traffic is going, you can follow it, you can go to Alexa and look at the traffic rank patterns. None of this is particularly technical, but it's all stuff that if journalists know how to do, then maybe we don't write a story about a site getting huge amounts of great traffic and wow, what a great business they have, right? Because that's another way for them to make it look like what they have is real. So, three kind of key things that stand out to me about this is we have a digital environment where you have so many signals that look really quantifiable. Oh, that got a lot of retweets and people must really be interested in it. Oh, that that website has a lot of traffic. But any of these things can be faked and they can be manipulated in a variety of ways. So if we come to them and we just take them all at face value, we write up that hashtag because it seems to be trending, then we're playing into the hands of people who know how to do this stuff. The people who know how to play the game are really being rewarded because we're not able to go to that next level and look at it. The other piece related especially to the Twitter story is we have to be very aware of the platforms and other companies and other entities that are talking about the levels of transparency, that are talking about the data that they're making available. There's always a huge amount, of course, that they aren't making available. And what they do make available is often slices of it. And I guess an analogy of this is, kind of what the data we can get from governments. A lot of times they're not giving everything. A lot of times we have to file a Freedom of Information request to get it. And that doesn't really exist for companies like Facebook and companies like Google. So advocating to get more data, but also at the very least showing how incomplete what they are giving us is probably a really important thing. And I just think, looking at the digital environment for me, so many stories get written, based on something that seems really clear and seems really obvious, but you scratch it a little bit and it's not really there. That's not what it is. And I think for journalists, this is obviously a really big challenge. It's a challenge for us to understand how to do these kinds of things. It's a challenge because, these folks are often better resourced than we are, who are, making up this stuff and coming up with the latest traffic scheme. But it's really an important thing for us to engage with. Otherwise, we end up passing on stuff that's complete garbage to the public. And I think one simple answer is reporting and not accepting stuff at face value. The other piece that I think is appropriate for for this particular alumni weekend is that these technologies and these approaches are always changing, and so it kind of takes us thinking every day about the struggle to keep up with this stuff and thinking every day about how we continue to learn. There's people in this room who are graduating in a few weeks, and you're not going to be done. I'm sorry. The sad news is you haven't learned everything that you have to learn yet, because every single day this environment is getting more and more complicated. It's getting into more and more parts of our lives. So even if you're not a media reporter like me, the reality is whatever beat you're on, this stuff is going to be a factor in it. And so we kind of have to commit to an ongoing learning that never ends. Otherwise, we get outpaced by the people who are really good at this kind of stuff. And that goes for alumni too. I'm sorry, you guys aren't finished either. I look forward to taking any questions and comments. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. So there's a microphone there in the middle if anyone would like to come up.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm just took a buyout from my financial magazine, and looking back on my career, I'm being asked to quantify what I did when I blogged. I blogged quite a bit about foreign countries, and I can attest to the fact that there were times when people were oddly very interested in Russia or Nigeria, especially during elections. So my question to you is, it's hard for me to go back now and actually figure out how much traffic I had and brag about certain things.
Right.
But similarly, as you've just shown us, who even trusts those numbers? So I'm in this quandary of, and I'm wondering what you think, all of us would love to know, how do we want to have this balance of doing good journalism and looking at the numbers, and now we can't even trust the numbers,
Right.
and we don't have access to them. So what are your thoughts? And are there websites we can use to look back at our traffic?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the best way to have a reasonably reliable measure of your traffic is if you've got, if you've installed, for example, the Google Analytics code on your website yourself, because then it's measuring it, it's on every page. The similar web data is interesting, but the data from the website itself of the people who have full access to it is going to look different. So a lot of times we're like making our best estimates, but definitely on that analytics side of it, I mean, there are a lot of programs and tools out there, and some of them are free, like Google Analytics, that you can install and that will be able to kind of give a pretty clear picture of your data. But there is an element of that grain of salt where when you see that direct traffic, you have to actually kind of dig in a little bit more and try to figure out, like, where is this actually coming from, and not accept it at face value there. I mean, that's the only way, is to really install it yourself and have it running there. There are external services, and if you didn't have it on your blog, then I would just encourage you to go and look at a combination of SimilarWeb and Alexa and any other kind of services that are out there, and just compare their data relative to each other to see what seems to be in common and what seems to be different. They often do have stuff that's in common, so that helps. On the numbers in the newsroom piece of it, this was a debate that I know probably people still have. I think a lot of newsrooms now have leaned more towards giving journalists a lot of access to analytics. When I talked to former reporters at International Business Times, actually a red flag for them was that no one was allowed to see the analytics for the sites that they worked on. And some people found that strange, because in a lot of newsrooms now you have like huge screens on the wall telling everyone what's performing best. And of course, the danger of that is that that's the message saying, well, that's what matters. Either you have lots of traffic on your story, or you're not at the top. And I mean, look, I work at BuzzFeed. Obviously, traffic is a thing that we pay attention to at BuzzFeed, right? And the news division is separate from all of the entertainment stuff. But even in the newsroom as well, we have different ways of kind of valuing the work. And I think that's the most important thing, is you should recognize what stuff is created specifically to have lots of attention and lots of traction. But there are also other things that you want to weigh in reporting. We have a reporter who freed 8 people from jail so far, based on a series of articles she did about what appears to be a very crooked cop in Chicago. And I have no idea how many people read her story, but freeing 8 people from jail, I would take that over 1 million views any single day, right? And so in a newsroom like BuzzFeed, where there is a value on traffic and there is a value on those kinds of engagement, there's also the value for that other kinds of impact. And our investigations editor, Mark Schoofs, who's as far as I'm concerned, like one of the best in the business at that, the view that he takes for his team is that we want people to read what we produce. We spend a lot of time working on it. And if we produce it in a way that people actually want to read it, and maybe they want to share it and they want to engage with it, then that's a piece of our success, along with really nailing that piece, along with exposing wrongdoing and harm. And so he builds it into that piece where they do care about people reading it, but they also care about the impact that they can have in the real world. And I think that's the balance that a lot of newsrooms are still trying to strike. There's no perfect formula for it, but if you can do both of those things, then that's a really great position to be in. Are there other folks with questions? Yeah, come on up. And you can feel free to line up as well. You can come on up.
Just what you were mentioning, those groups that are sort of playing both sides, they have both the Republican and the Democrat side, and then a religious. What is the motivation? Is it about influence, or are they monetizing it?
Yeah, so there's one guy that I interviewed who I think summed it up pretty well. He said something to the effect of, I was in it for the cause, and then I bought my second Mustang, and I realized I was in it for the money. It may not have been a Mustang, but so I think that there's that scenario where there were people who were really kind of true believers and doing it for a particular reason, and then the money started getting really good, particularly in 2016. It's not as good now. Facebook has really cracked down. So there's a good amount of people that are monetarily driven, and they started maybe in one ideology or the next, and then they just became publishers and business people, and they're just figuring out how to make money. Folks who are really committed, partisans who are very active in the parties. I don't see them playing both sides as much as people who seem to really just, be trying to run a business. Yeah.
Hey.
Hi.
I have a question regarding breaking news. There's been a lot of discussion regarding quoting, people realizing that they were quoting people who were either bots or that were either playing for these hashtags, or that they were even creating these Facebook groups for events that were non-American or abroad. And there's been this conversation regarding breaking news and the rush to report on these very real events that will happen, and people go to these events that are being organized, or they participate in these hashtags that are being set up, and there's more and more national and even local news desks that are reporting on this. But in the absolute need to determine what is fake and what is real in the rush, especially immediately following a mass shooting or even racially motivated violence, I would be really interested in sort of your tips for how to navigate that when it seems to be urgency is of a particular importance, or there seems to be a rush and there isn't as much time to sort of parse out what is possibly fake.
Yeah. I mean, that's the most urgent scenario. Breaking news about natural disaster or some of the examples you gave. And I'll put it in two categories. So one category is, the element of like, okay, let's get people's reaction to the event. Let's round up a bunch of comments on Twitter or what have you. So that's one zone. Then the other zone is what is actually happening and what are we sourcing from social media to actually tell the story and say, this Twitter account claims that 2 people are dead. Are we going to quote that Twitter account or not? And I think there's somewhat different decision making for the two of them. On this side, the first thing that I always say to newsrooms is if you're trying to sort of figure this out on the fly, like you're going to do a really bad job. These skills around verification, I don't think they've been treated with the kind of seriousness that they need. And so people in the newsroom, like there's maybe one person who kind of thinks about this stuff and they try to press them into service. But if you're not a newsroom who actually tries to do training and tries to talk about this and think about, well, what do we value in these really urgent moments and what kind of stuff are we going to put in and what kind of stuff are we not? It's the most basic level of like, what is our standard for that? And I think a lot of newsrooms fall into trouble when they haven't defined what that is. In terms of concrete tips when you're looking at Twitter accounts or things like that, particularly in urgent breaking news situations, if you can't confirm that account is actually where they say they are, or that photo is a photo that they took and the photo is of that location at that time and at that day, then you don't want to use it, is the overarching thing. And there are lots of tools and ways to actually look at this. And now as I realize, perfect segue. So this is a Google Doc that I have that I put some of the most essential tools that I use for doing this kind of work. So it has tools, for example, of if you're trying to figure out whether a photo is new or if a photo has actually been online for 3 years. You can do a reverse image search. There's a list of browser plugins at the very top of this list that give you a series of tools to help you analyze social sharing, to help you analyze videos and images online. So please take that down. It's case sensitive, so do it all lowercase on the verification tools and tips. Thank you, Karen, because I completely forgot that I had that on a slide. So I swear I didn't pay her to do that question. But it's there, and I just want to emphasize, like, this has a lot of tools, and then I link to a few other resources and places where you can go and read up on this stuff. This is like the struggle to keep up with everything. But it's not just about learning a bunch of tools. You have to know what to use them for. You have to know what questions you're trying to answer. You have to know how to apply them. And to that point about the breaking news scenario, if you just open this doc for the first time when an earthquake has happened and you try to use these, you're finished. It's not going to work. So look at this stuff, look at it ahead of time. And then the last thing on the breaking news piece is have a conversation with your colleagues in your newsroom and figure out what are our standards in these scenarios. What are we valuing most? Are we only going to cite official verified accounts from local police or other places? Then set that as your standard. And the other bucket quickly is, just sort of like doing the reaction piece. there were a lot of places that quoted accounts that turned out to be Russian trolls. I know we had articles where we had embedded tweets, as like, here's what people are saying about this. And if you're going to do those pieces, you're probably going at some point get a little bit burned because somebody turns out to be something else later down the line. And this is why, like, I think sometimes those pure social reaction pieces are maybe not worth the effort. At the very least, again, have the conversation in your newsroom of, what are the accounts we're including, and can we give any kind of a preamble to people to say that, like, we're putting these here, we're not necessarily endorsing that we know exactly who all these people are. So just the decision and thinking about it is good. Come on up.
You said the newspapers, or the press hasn't been taking this as seriously as it should. Have the advertising community, either the people who buy the ads or the people who place the ads or other institutions involved in this economy, recognize the fraud that's going on, and are they taking steps, or we require BuzzFeed to do the work of the society for us?
Let's hope not. Let's hope it doesn't come down to that. I have a team of 4 people, so that's not going to work, right? There's kind of 2 things converging right now. One on the side of like the platforms of Twitter and Facebook and all of them, they're making more of an effort to moderate and take responsibility for what is happening on their platforms. And they really weren't doing that before. And so they're starting to really pay more attention to this stuff. Like, we're still far away from the best case scenario. And that process of kind of them starting to pay more attention and to be a little more rigorous in what they allow and don't allow on their platform, there is a similar movement happening on the advertising side. They're really concerned about their ads showing up next to extremist videos on YouTube. They're very concerned about their ads showing up on websites that have completely fake traffic. And the problem is that they've let it get to the point where $16 billion is getting stolen from them before they sort of say, okay, maybe we need to look at this. So the big problem on the advertising ecosystem is that pretty much everybody benefits from the fraud except for the brand who's spending the money. And this is what I've experienced. I've done about 5 or 6 ad fraud investigations, and in some cases I've found people working at agencies who are actually running sites on the side committing ad fraud. If you're the agency and you do the ad buy and you have to go back to your client and say, so like 15% of our buy just completely got siphoned off by garbage and fraudulent stuff, don't worry, we're gonna like get the money back, because usually there are refunds when you can show that happened. But like, just wanted you to know, no agency wants to say that to their client. And similarly, the people who are making commissions off of the ads being placed, none of them want $16 billion to suddenly disappear from the advertising ecosystem. So there's a culture of silence and complicity that's going on there, and that's a really big problem that's contributing to this continuing to go. There are some advertising industry initiatives. If you're interested in this, there's a group called the Trustworthy Accountability Group, which is auditing websites. Have to meet certain conditions to sort of continue to be with them, which is a place where advertisers will hopefully feel safe. There's also an initiative called ads.txt, whereby websites are listing all of the ad networks that they work with so that it's clear who they work with and who they don't. So if you see the ability to buy an ad on BuzzFeed.com, but it's listed with an exchange that we don't work with, then you know that's actually not going to get you ads on BuzzFeed.com. So it is getting a bit better. But I don't know, if $16 billion is getting stolen and nobody goes to jail and nobody loses their job, it's a bit of a problem. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done there. Yeah.
Hi, Anton Makovsky, class of '68.
Congratulations.
Okay, thank you. I use Twitter, I admit it, and I also just look all over on the internet, YouTube, whatever. I don't like Facebook very much, but a lot of people will send you to Facebook, your friends and corporations and so on. Before I post anything factual on Twitter, I fact check myself. Do you think Wikipedia is reliable? Don't answer yet. I have 3 more little points.
3 more? Oh my gosh.
Okay, RT, which means retweet, is a very troublesome abbreviation to me because it also stands for Russia Today. And there are these people that do this follow back, which is they want to get 5,000 followers, and so they say, well, gee, I'll follow you, you follow me.
Yeah.
I'm not like that. I think I have about 230 followers that I'm very happy with.
You should say your username. You'll get some more right now. You know?
It's at A. Makovsky, and there's a picture of me wearing a Columbia hat with a C on it.
Wow.
When I first started to get followers, I noticed that some of them were just pictures of beautiful, suggestive women with something like "I like flowers" underneath it. So I started calling them hotbots. Should I purge them out of my followers? Are they dangerous? Do they spread virus? And these are not. They may overlap with Russia bots. I don't know. The journalistic ethic was I'm really killing.
Yeah. You should come up here. I might just sit down now.
Well, I try to balance what I tweet. Some funny, some sarcastic, some very serious. Okay. The journalistic ethic was, before you publish something, you should have 2 independent sources. And this was destroyed by 2 things. It was destroyed by Novak publishing the attack on Valerie Plame using one source and the other source was the same source. You remember? It was like 2 hits from the same source. Drudge was like, who needs ethics? I'll just run anything. So that's kind of like you said about setting standards. I like it when the Times or somebody says, we have 17 different sources. That looks like really impressive, right? Also, you mentioned this cascading referrals where they make you hit and you don't even know you're hitting.
Right.
You know, now I have seen that happen occasionally, usually from some shady thing like your example. I find that it's very hard to exit out, to close it.
Yes.
They don't let you close it.
Yeah.
So would your advice be to close your browser or, okay. So those are my questions, if you can remember them.
If you had another one, I wasn't going to be able to remember them all. All right. So Wikipedia. I think that as a sort of starting point, it's not bad, right? Like I wouldn't take everything in there as the gospel, but what it has is citations at the bottom. So if you're trying to learn about something, looking at Wikipedia and seeing the citations and seeing if there are reputable sources you recognize there, it's not a bad place to start and go follow those from there. So I think it does have some usefulness, and I do think that over time it's really proven to be quite a valuable resource online. Of course, like if you're checking Wikipedia about something in the context of breaking news, there are people battling over the edits in that, so it's kind of fun to watch it change, but you need to be cautious about that. As for your, what did you call them, honeybots problem?
Hotbots.
Hotbots, sorry. Hotbots. So usually what they might try and do, like if, for example, you have your DMs open that anybody could DM you, or if you were to follow them back, then usually the scam is that they try to DM you a message and get you to click on something, which could lead to infecting your computer or something like that. So stay out of the private messaging with them and you're okay. I mean, you're welcome to purge them if you want. There's no big danger to you.
Just on that, does Twitter as an entity engage in purging?
They do. Not as much as they probably should, but they do.
I mean, you're not asking them to do it, but they
correct.
They comb through and they purge.
They do purges at different times, and they've had recent purges. So yes, they will do that on an ongoing basis. But also, I mean, Twitter has admitted itself that I think roughly between 10 and 15% of its user base is automated or otherwise not run by human accounts. And so a lot of people feel that Twitter, it's not in their best interest to go out and clean everything out because all of a sudden their user numbers are going to decline. So there's a certain amount of there's a certain amount of acceptability that a lot of these platforms have where they leave this stuff on there. Now, was there a third one? I forget what the third one was.
Oh, I don't know. Just that I mentioned that RT is Russia Today.
Yes,
so
I agree with you.
Use
that's
RT
the same
because,
abbreviation.
It could be searched. It could be,
Thank you very much. All right, I think we have time for one more.
Tough act to follow.
What class are you?
I didn't go to Columbia.
Okay.
Great school.
I'm sorry, you can't ask a question then.
All right, so beyond increasing reader literacy or media literacy, journalistic vigilance, and then industry changes. What are some of the more compelling public policy changes you're seeing either enacted or in motion? And then are there any that are concerning that kind of swing too far against it?
So I think one of the things that's been really effective so far when we think about what governments are doing, and I'm certainly not a policy expert, is I think the threat of regulation has proven to be a very good motivator right now, almost better than passing really bad laws. So the platforms like Facebook and Google and them, Germany is very happy to regulate them, and so there's new privacy laws coming in Europe. We know all that. But they don't want the German approach to spread to other places. And so a lot of the proactive stuff that we're seeing from these companies right now is because they want to send the message to Congress that, listen, we will handle this. We will absolutely handle this. So the threat of regulation is right now probably the most effective piece. I'm a little wary of new laws because, as you said in kind of the second part of your question, this stuff can cut another way. So we are seeing in other countries around the world, I think it was Malaysia, they recently had a new so-called fake news law where the government was going to decide what was fake news, right? And instantly this should be chilling for not just for journalists but for everybody. Mark Zuckerberg likes to say he doesn't want to be the arbiter of truth. I don't really want the government to be the arbiter of truth either. And so we do have a risk of some good discussion and legitimate outrage about this stuff actually being used to enact censorship and other types of bad outcomes. Some of the countries that have proposed these laws have often kind of walked them back a little bit, but there is a risk that already autocratic countries are going to use this as a way to crack down. We're seeing it a little bit. Duterte in the Philippines has been trying to really put a huge amount of pressure on a couple of independent outlets, one of them being Rappler. The last thing I would note is there's this difficult intersection that's happening with these companies, which are just as or more powerful than governments in some ways. And the governments, and the Philippines is a good example. So Duterte is really going hard at Rappler, and yet Facebook recently just removed the pages of, I think it was about 10 websites for spreading total fake misinformation. But a bunch of those sites were pro-Duterte sites and pages. And so now Duterte is literally speaking out and saying, you leave Rappler up and they're biased, but you get rid of sites that like me. And so this is a tough kind of situation that is going to keep going. And I don't see a perfect public policy solution, but actually getting them engaged and bringing these platforms in and making them testify and keeping an eye on them is probably a really good first step, at least, right? All right. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I believe there's a reception that way. I'll see you over there.